All right, hey people, sorry I'm gone again today, but we're going to take some quick notes and then I'm going to give you an activity to do with the sub today. So you should be able to work the whole class period today. Okay, so you should have the handout that has the slides on the front and the back page of this. So I want you to mark up the slides or make notes out to the side however you want to, but you need to remember the things that I'm telling you today through this presentation because a lot of this stuff is going to be on the test that you take next Tuesday. All right, so there's your reminder. We're taking a test next Tuesday on November, what is it? Tuesday's date is November 19th, so be prepared for that, okay? All right, so our first slide here, we're talking about the diffusion of people, okay? Diffusion just means the spread, okay? So the spread of people from a small portion of area to the rest of it resulted from migration, okay? So when people spread across the earth, and they permanently, this word permanently, that means for good, right? When people move for good, that term is called migration, okay? Which I think you guys know that when people move, they are migrating, okay? So that is different from just like going to travel on vacation and then you come back to Frisco, right? Migration is talking about when you up and move to a new place, all right? That's migration. This bottom part, I don't want you to do any of this because we don't have time for that, okay? But migration is just simply moving from one place to another, and you're not going to go back to that first place. So I want you to think about how many times your family has moved, okay? Some of you have probably moved a lot of times. Some of you maybe have grown up in Frisco your whole life. I am probably the exception, but my family, since I was born, has not moved any times. My parents still live in the same house that they brought me home to 26 years ago. Isn't that crazy? So I know that I'm an exception there, but to me, myself, I moved away to college, and then I moved to Austria when I was in college and lived there for a semester, and then moved a few times when I was in Stillwater, and then I moved back to Texas, and then I moved to Frisco, okay? So I myself have moved a few times, and for the most part, all of my moves have been exciting, but maybe your moves have maybe been traumatic if you didn't want to leave your place, if you really don't have a say at this point if your family moves or not, right? Because your parents are pretty much making that decision for you. But maybe that was scary or traumatic or sad for you. But maybe you were excited too, okay? So people will move for different reasons, and that's what I'm trying to get you to think about, okay? So was it maybe for bad things or for good things? The next question asks you to think about why people would make a perilous just means hard, okay, or difficult. Why would people make a difficult journey across thousands of miles? I just want you to think like why someone would move if it would be dangerous. Maybe people would leave because if they had stayed, it was more dangerous to stay than to move, right? Maybe there was war going on or some sort of conflict, or maybe the journey was going to be scary, but if they had hope of getting to a better place at the end of that, then that's why people would leave, if there was hope for a better life somewhere else, okay? And then I want you to think about why people would continue to migrate today. So why are people still moving today? There's a lot of things. Sometimes, we don't necessarily experience it, but people around the world are still in conflict, are still in war, or maybe there's a food shortage or job shortages, and so other places might have a better job opportunity or more freedom somewhere else. So there are certain things that will make people migrate, okay? There are different types of migration. Forced migration, right here means that people are moving because someone else is telling them to, okay? So there is authority or power that people are having, they're being forced to move, okay? So we could explain that as like it's against their own will. Against their own will, okay? So they don't want to leave, but they're being forced to leave, okay? So we'll talk about some examples of that here in a second. Voluntary migration, on the other hand, is when the person wants to leave, okay? So the migrant here has the decision. The person has a choice, chooses to leave, okay? So it says that they're weighing their options. So that person has the freedom to decide if moving from their current place that they're living, if moving would be better, or if they should stay and that would be okay one day, or whatever the situation may be. Voluntary migration is when people have the freedom to choose whether or not it would be a good idea to move. Sometimes this can be seen both ways. That's what this one is talking about. An example of this would be like forced migration. An example of forced migration could be like slavery. Right? So think back to a long time ago. I know you learned about it in 8th grade, but slavery is an example of forced migration, right? The Europeans came to Africa and physically removed the Africans and brought them to the Americas for the slave trade, right? So that's forced migration. But some people might argue and say, well, the slaves didn't have to get on the boats and the slaves didn't have to follow the rules of the Europeans, so therefore it was voluntary. However, there's some holes with that a little bit, because then you could argue, well, if the slaves in Africa said that they weren't going to go, then what would happen to them? They probably would have been killed, right? So we can assume that would happen. So sometimes if people at the end of the day, people, yes, have the right to say, no, I'm not going, and put my foot down. But if that will result in death or harm, then to me personally, that's like forced migration. Same thing with like a war, right? If there's a war that's happening outside, and then I could stay, right? I could stay at my house, but if there's a war happening, I will probably die, because my house might get blown up or something, right? And so to me, that's forced migration, because yes, I could stay, which would make it voluntary, but if I stayed and my house blew up, then I would die, right? So to me, there's a clear line between forced and voluntary migration, but sometimes people will argue that. So you kind of have to decide where that line is for you. If you're someone who wants to say, oh no, everything is voluntary, then that's okay. That's your opinion. But I lean more towards the side of there is forced migration, there is voluntary migration, okay? So that's that kind of argument. The next thing we need to talk about is immigrant and immigrant. They sound the same, don't they? The difference here is the way it's spelled, all right? So immigrant with a E is easy for me to remember, because that person is exiting a country, okay? So E and E. Immigrant with a E means that the person is leaving the country, okay? So if we were moving away from the United States, we would be an immigrant with an E from the U.S., okay? Because we are exiting the U.S. However, an immigrant with an I is moving into another country, okay? So if we were going to if we were going to move to Mexico, we would be immigrating. We would be an immigrant with an I to Mexico, because we would be going into Mexico. Okay, so we would be an immigrant to Mexico with an I. All right, so that one's easy to remember. Immigrant with an E is for exit. Immigrant with an I is going into. All right. Okay, so here's some more examples of forced migration for you. Historically examples, like I talked about, the slaves, they were forcibly removed from Africa, right? We've talked about Australia before. Australia was used as a prison colony where the British would ship their prisoners to Australia. Okay, those prisoners didn't have a choice whether or not they were going to stay in Great Britain or not. They were just moved to Australia. Another good example here is the Native Americans. When the Native Americans were removed from the East Coast, right, with the Indian Removal Act, they pushed the Native Americans to the middle of the country, right, and gave them the reservations. And so that was against their own will too. The Native Americans were removed. So that's an example of forced migration. Also another good example, I guess it's not good, but an example of forced migration would be the Nazis forcing the Jews into concentration camps and removing them from their cities and their towns in Europe, okay? So that was forced migration. Something else that you need to know is that counter-migration is a thing, all right? So counter-migration is when governments send back migrants that are coming in illegally, okay? So this is like a deportation. So governments will deport illegal immigrants back into their home countries, all right? So that's all historic examples. Current examples, you might say, what? I didn't know that there are current examples of forced migration happening in the world today. Well, there are. Here in a little bit, I will tell you about refugees, asylum seekers, and IDPs. But when people are forced to leave it right now in the world today, it's usually due to like bad things that are happening. Okay, so in Syria, Afghanistan, and in Palestine, there's a lot of conflict there, okay, and wars and stuff going on. So it's just not safe there. And so people will leave that region because it's not safe to stay there. And so we'll talk about this here in a second. And then there are trafficked people. So this is like sex trafficking. You probably know a little bit about it, which is not a good thing. But that's when, people are taken against their will and sold into this like illegal sex trade, which is horrible. But obviously people don't have really the choice to leave that either. Because they're kind of taken against their own will. And then smuggled people as well. This usually happens like in Africa. When people are trying to leave Africa because, again, it's not safe, or for whatever reasons they're trying to leave, and then they will be kind of picked up and smuggled into kind of like a current slavery type of situation, which is also really sad, but that does happen in today's world as well, which is really terrible. But all of these are examples of forced migration. Okay, voluntary migration. This is really when we're talking about push and pull factors, okay, because people are weighing their options. Remember, I spelled that right. Weighing options. So they're choosing if they're going to go or not. And when people have the luxury to choose if they move to a new place, then we're talking about push factors and push and pull factors. Remember, push factors are the bad things. It's going to push you away from a place, okay? So centrifugal forces, an F, this is going to be like a fight. So a push factor could be that there is not any freedom, right, to practice your own religion, or whatever the case may be. Or maybe there's not enough jobs there, or something like that, okay? But the opposite of push factors, there will always be an opposite pull factor, okay? And pull factors are going to be positive. Centripetal with a P means positive, okay? So it's easy to remember these things. So positive things are going to bring someone to that place. Bring to that place, okay? So good things. So maybe there are jobs available, and maybe they do have freedom in the new place. Something you need to know about voluntary migration is that there's this thing that's called brain drain, which kind of sounds funny, but brain drain happens when highly educated people leave a place that is maybe like an LDC or an NIC. Okay, so they're leaving a place with not many opportunities. Okay, we'll say that. So sometimes opportunities. So LDCs and NICs still have like universities and people who do make decent amounts of money, right? Like there are still opportunities to be wealthy in LDCs. That just doesn't happen for a lot of people. But usually if people are coming from LDCs or NICs and they are highly educated, so they finished high school and then they went on to get a college degree, or they are highly skilled in a certain job, and they decide to leave that poor country and go somewhere else because maybe they could make more money or use their skills or their education in a richer country and get more money for it, then a lot of times those people will leave the lesser developed country and go to the richer country to make more money. And that's what we call brain drain. Okay, because you could maybe think of it as your brainiacs leaving the country, kind of like, a drain, like water goes down a drain and it leaves. So that's something that you will need to know. Hint, hint, you might want to remember that for next week. All right, and then this last slide here, we have different types of push and pull factors. Remember, there will always be an opposite push and pull factor. So economic conditions, a lot of the times, remember, economics means money, okay? And how do you get money? You get money by jobs, right? So economic examples here could be like job opportunities, okay? So a push factor would be that there are opportunities. Wow, why am I struggling spelling that word today? So a push factor for economic conditions could be that there are not any job opportunities, but a pull factor to a different country would be that there are job opportunities. So I could move to a different country and be able to find a job. That would be an economic pull factor. Just so you know, this is going to be a top reason that the U.S. Has pull. It's a huge pull factor for the U.S. U.S. pull factor, so that you'll remember this. U.S. pull factor is going to be because of money, okay? So that's why a lot of people will move to the U.S. because they think that they'll be able to get a job, make more money, and have a better life for themselves and their families, okay? Political circumstances. This could be like dictators. Dictators would definitely be a push factor. So this is like your government. So maybe you don't have very much governmental or government freedom. So maybe you don't get to vote in elections or something, okay? And a dictator is telling you what you can and can't do. That would be a push factor. But the opposite of that would be that there would be a country that does have a lot of political freedom. So I do get to have a say in elections and voting and who's in office and who's going to represent me, okay? So that would be the opposite pull factor for political circumstances. The next one is armed conflict and civil war. So here we are with war again, right? That would definitely be a push factor, right? If there was conflict and war, it would be unsafe. right? But the opposite pull factor of that would be that it was safe or peaceful, right? That would be a reason why you would go to a different country. If you're leaving a country that has a lot of war and conflict, then you would want to go to a safer place or a country that was more peaceful, right? The next one is environmental conditions. The environment here is just talking about like our surroundings, right, in the world. So an example of this would be natural disasters. So if you live in Florida, right, what kind of natural disaster are you probably going to experience more than people in the middle of the country? Hurricanes, right? So if you don't want to deal with hurricanes, or maybe someone has grown up in Florida their whole life and they really hate hurricanes. They hate all the storms that come, or maybe they've been hit by a bad hurricane before or whatever, right? That would push them away. That would be a push factor, right? So the opposite of that would be moving to a place that doesn't get affected by hurricanes, right? You could also say the same thing for like tornadoes, right? Or like the cold. Personally, I would never want to live in northern Canada or in Norway because I am a baby when it gets to be really cold outside, okay? So that would definitely be a push factor for me. So an opposite pull factor would be moving to a place that is warm and doesn't have Arctic blizzard temperatures for most of the year, right? That would be my pull factor to somewhere else, okay? The last thing we have is culture traditions, okay? This is kind of dealing with social factors here. So for this example that is down here, it talks about how India was... a long time ago, when Great Britain colonized India, it was bigger than just India. It included Pakistan and Bangladesh and all of that kind of South Asia region. All right. And so when Great Britain finally left India, there were two kind of big groups there. It was the Hindus and the Muslims. Okay. Those are two very different religions. And so when Great Britain left that region, they made two different countries, and they were based off of the religions, all right? So there, at this point, there were some Muslims who were living inside of India, and those Muslims moved to the Pakistan region because that was going to be a primarily Muslim region. And then opposite of that, there were Hindus living in the Pakistan region, but those Hindus migrated to India because there were more people like them, okay? So the push and pull factors there were, the pull factors were to be towards or with people who are similar to them. The push factor was because they were surrounded by people who were not like them or who didn't practice the same religion, okay? So cultures and traditions can be push and pull factors if you're living in a very different place than what your culture is. And then the pull factor would be towards people or with people who practice the same things and have the same traditions. That's the end of our notes for right now. So I want you to take a picture of this and put it in your Google folder as number 17, people, 3 times, notes, okay? So the sub is going to pause the video right now. You're going to take a picture of it and upload it, and then in a few minutes, you'll come back and I will explain what you're going to do next. Okay, notes should be put up by now, and we're going to look at more specific examples of migration. You should have the packet that says Migration Scavenger Hunt up at the top. And so what you need to know is that in the world today, there is an estimated 1 billion migrants. Okay, so that's 1 in every 7 people that are migrants, which is a lot of people who are choosing to leave their homes and move somewhere else, all right? And so with this scavenger hunt, we are going to look specifically at why people move. Okay, the first page of your packet looks like this, okay? But we need to talk about some of these differences so that way these stories and videos that you're going to watch and read will make more sense, okay? So we'll kind of go through a little bit of this together, all right? So the first thing you need to know, these are some vocab terms. I believe it's on your vocab matrix, but those are IDPs, asylum seekers, and refugees. So we need to talk about why or how those things are different. Okay, so IDPs are internally, I'm going to zoom in here, are internally displaced people. Okay, internally displaced people. All right, so if we're just thinking about those words, what does the term internally mean? It means within, okay? So these are people who are moving within their own country, okay? So I'm not even going to say people. I'm going to say migrants within their own country. Okay, so these are people who are not passing borders, okay? They're not crossing borders into other countries. All right, they're staying within their own home country. They're just having to leave, okay? Most of the time, internally displaced people and asylum seekers and refugees, all of these are happening primarily because something bad is happening, okay? These three terms out here to the side, why don't you write that this is usually because of conflict, okay? So this is bad things, all right? Bad things are forcing these people to move, okay? But the first step of kind of getting out of places that are struggling or unsafe is that you leave your first or your home, and you kind of do this in steps, okay? So the first thing would be to leave your home, and go away, but maybe not across a border yet, okay? So they're staying within their own country because they are internally displaced. They are removing themselves from the problem, but they're not outside of their country yet. Asylum seekers are the next ones. This is usually asylum seekers and refugees get confused, all right? A lot of the times in the news you will hear like reporters and stuff refer to people as refugees when really they're just asylum seekers. They usually don't use the term asylum seeker, even though that is the politically correct term for people. So asylum seekers are people who leave their country. So they do go one step further than IDPs. They leave their country and they're looking for safety, okay? So again, this is happening because maybe there's war or there's conflict or someone's coming after them, whatever the case may be. They're leaving their country and they're looking to move to a new place, but they're fleeing, okay? That's a good word for this, is that they're just fleeing the conflict, okay? The thing is that you can't just leave a country and become a citizen of whatever new country you want to be in, okay? Most of the time these people are rushed. They're just trying to leave and get out of their country without a solid plan. And so things get confusing because then the rest of the world is kind of stuck like, well, do we take them? Like, do we open our borders and take in these people who are fleeing? Because we can't necessarily send them back if it's not safe, right? It becomes this whole moral issue of who takes care of these people who are trying to leave an unsafe situation, okay? So once these people leave, they're seeking asylum, okay? So they're looking for safety, and other countries have to protect that, okay? But the thing is that they're not official yet. They don't have refugee status, and they're not new citizens yet of a new country, all right? And so they're almost like they're just stuck in limbo, which means that they are like not going back to the place that they left because it's unsafe, but also they're not fully accepted into a new country yet, okay? And so typically that's where you might see pictures of like refugee camps. They will call it refugee camps when really it's asylum seekers who are living in these camps because they just need safety. And so they make these like makeshift camps where people are sleeping in tents or very like informal places. And the thing is that these people can't have jobs. They don't go to school. And they can't own anything, okay? So they've like left everything behind at their house because they've left it because it was unsafe. And so then they get to this camp and they want to be a citizen of a new place or of a new country, but they don't have that refugee status yet, which is what we're about to talk about. They're not a full refugee because they haven't been accepted into a new country yet, okay? So maybe we write that down too. Not accepted fully, okay? They're like people, they can live in these camps, but they're not accepted fully into a new country yet, okay? Once that acceptance happens, then they become a refugee, okay? So it's kind of like a step process here. Typically, you'll be an IDP, you'll leave your place, you'll stay inside of your country, and then once you make it past your borders and you make it into a camp, you're an asylum seeker. So you're in limbo because you're waiting for your papers, essentially, and your request to be a refugee in a new country. You have to be approved, and the government of that new country has to accept you. And so while you're waiting for that approval to happen, you're kind of just stuck in this limbo, living in this camp. You can't really do anything because you can't really have a job. You can't really go to school because you're not a citizen of a new country and you're not going back to your old country, okay? So this asylum seeker is really a term that not many people use, but that's where a lot of people are, is that they're just stuck in this waiting, this holding phase, okay? Once these asylum seekers obtain that approval from whatever country they want to be in, once they get that recognition and their papers back and they are approved, then they can move to a new country, okay? So you become a refugee when you have acceptance into a new country, okay? So you don't have to go back to the bad place that you just left from, and you are accepted into a new country, okay? You finally have official approval by the government to the new country. We should add that, by the government. Okay, that's an important piece. The government has to accept you and they have to recognize you, okay? So then those people can move to the new country and begin their new life, really, to new place. And we'll just add, and begin a new life, okay? So they are officially approved. They can move, leave the asylum seeker camp. They can leave those camps and really start a new life. And with this, then they can apply for citizenship of a new country, okay? So offered. So they're going to not be a citizen of their old country anymore, and they can apply for a new citizenship with their new country. But again, all of this has to deal with the government, okay? The government of the new country has to approve you, and then you can obtain your refugee status, all right? But you only become a refugee when the government recognizes you and approves you to come into their country, all right? So that is the difference between refugee and asylum seeker. Asylum seekers don't yet have that approval, and refugees do have the approval of the government, okay? So that's the difference between those three. It kind of moves in a step. You go from an IDP typically to an asylum seeker, and then to a refugee. And most of the time, like, this is all still happening today, and a lot of the time, which is what you're about to see, most of the people today who are IDPs, asylum seekers, or refugees, are coming from Africa and the Middle East. okay, because that's really where a lot of our conflict is happening today, and it's the most unsafe places in the world, and so that's where most of these people are coming from. And that wraps up the notes part that I needed to help you through at the top part of this packet. So you need to know that before you get into the rest of this. So the rest of this page, I want you to go ahead and explain number 2, what are push and pull factors. Remember, we just talked about that with our notes. So if you want to pull those back out and write down what push and pull factors are. And then for number 3, you need to give an example of each type of push and pull factors. Remember, that was like I believe that was the last slide that we just looked at from our notes a second ago. So make sure you give me a push and a pull factor. Remember, every push factor has an opposite pull factor, okay? So give me a push and a pull factor for A, B, C, D, and E. All right, so just write that on your paper. And then at the very bottom of your paper, it kind of gives you a scenario to think about. If you were a refugee, okay, if you were having to leave, I want to know what you would take with you if you had 30 minutes just to grab whatever you had in your house. Tell me what you would take, okay? So answer those questions first. I'll give you a few minutes to do that, and then I'll explain the rest of what's about to happen. When you're finished answering those questions from the first page, I want you to take a look around the room. I showed you this the other day, but I put up the QR codes around the room. Remember, there's 2 sets. There's one on the side of the room with the windows, and then there's one set that's on the side of the room with the whiteboard. Okay, there are, I believe, 10 QR codes, or no, there's 9, I guess, QR codes on both sides of the room. Okay, so you don't have to go scan all of these, but what I want you to do is take your phone and scan these QR codes around the room. Okay, it's going to bring you to a video or an article, but they all have different migrant stories. Okay, I think some of them have multiple stories in there. Some of them might just be one story. Whatever the case may be, just start scanning them, and then I want you to go sit down and read the article or listen to the video or watch the video, and learn about the different migrants who are leaving their home countries, okay? And when you're reading or watching those videos, you will be filling out the chart that's on the back page, okay? The chart looks like this, and so you're going to tell me in the left-hand column, you're going to tell me about the problems that they face. So what were their hardships, okay, or their struggles, okay? What was making them want to leave, or what were problems that they faced on their journey, okay? Struggles or problems on their journey. Okay, so there's a couple of things there that you could choose to write down in that column. Remember, emigrating from, that means what country they're leaving. Okay, so you're going to tell me about what country they are leaving from. They are leaving. And then emigrating to, and then emigrating with an I is into. All right, so country they're going to. They're going into, okay? And then in the last column, I want you to just explain what some of the push and pull factors were for the story that you're reading or watching. What are the push and pull factors that were making those people leave? And so you'll list those out here, okay? So you will go through as many as you can. I want you to get at least 4 to 5 of those, so this should keep you pretty busy, because I want you to read the full article, watch the full video, to really understand what these people are going through, okay? So when you fill out the chart, you can just draw a line, and then go on to the next one, okay, and then say you finish that one, then just draw another line, and then you can fill out your stuff and so on and so forth, okay? So I want you to get 4 to 5 of these. This is a grade, so I need you to do this well, and not just blow through this, okay? Because I will be looking for 4 to 5, at least 4 to 5 different stories on your charts, okay? As you do each story, you're going to flip over to the back page. You have a map that looks like this, and you're going to map the migrant that you're reading or watching. You're going to map their story. Okay, so let's say that the story I'm listening to has my person leaving the U.S. So it says to shade in the country and label it. Okay, that's the U.S. Let's say my person was leaving the U.S. To move to Brazil. Okay, this is Brazil. You're labeling and shading it in, but you have to do both. And you have to connect it with an arrow, okay? You're going to do that in the same color for each story, okay? So that one went with my first one up here. Let's say my second color for my second story is going to be purple, okay? And then let's say my person, in my second story, there was a person leaving Australia who went to China. All right, that's China. And then I will connect it with my arrow, okay? So you will do that for each one of the stories, all right? So you'll color code it. Just do each story in a different color. You have to tell me where they're leaving from, where they're going to, and connect it with an arrow. Based on their journey. All right, so all of this is going to be a grade. You need to complete the first page first, that front page, and then you'll start scanning the QR codes around the room, read or watch the story, fill out the chart as you go, and then make sure you're mapping it on the back side. All right. You guys will turn this in at the end of the period, okay? I will pick up these at some point and start grading them. So again, I should see 4 to 5 stories and 4 to 5 things mapped on your maps, all right? So again, this is a grade. Make sure you take a picture of this. This whole thing is going to be number 18, migration, case study, packet, okay? So take a picture of all 3 pages before you turn this in, because I will be grading your Google folders next week when you come in on Tuesday, okay? So make sure that you take a picture of this before you turn it in. Please turn it into the sub, because I will grade the whole packet like on paper. So I'm gonna grade the hard copy of it, okay? But make sure you take a picture of it, put it on as number 18. Don't forget about your test review and vocab matrix that I'll be checking on Tuesday. And this should take you to the end of the period. Please be good. I will see you guys next week.